Friends of Canadian Broadcasting podcast.
Hello, it's Ian Morrison here. Welcome to the podcast. This edition features a video of my recent presentation to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, which is holding hearings on the crisis in local television. As you will hear, I discuss with MPs details of a study Friends commissioned last year from Polara, Canada's leading public opinion firm, which found that Canadians consider local news their top television priority, and they would be willing to pay more on their cable satellite bills to protect and enhance Canadian programming. I also refer to another Polara survey we have just released, which demonstrates that the vast majority of Canadians support strong funding for public broadcasting. This flies in the face of the recent Harper government decision to ask CBC to identify spending cuts of up to $56 million from its already depleted budget. My presentation lasts approximately 10 minutes and is followed by a 17-minute question and answer period, which includes some lively interaction among our parliamentarians. Enjoy.
Friends of Canadian Broadcasting is an independent watchdog for Canadian programming in the English language audiovisual system, supported by 100,000 Canadians. Thank you for granting us an opportunity to appear before you today.
Television model, acquiring U.S. network programming, wrapping Canadian ads around them, subsidizing Canadian programming with the resulting profits, is failing. Canadian over-the-air broadcasters are competing to bid up the cost of U.S. programming at the same time as their audience is declining. And now they also report that local news programming is no longer profitable. As you know, advertisers follow audiences. Over the past decade, a major shift has taken place within the advertising pie. Web advertising has increased in Canada from $25 million in 1998 to $1.5 billion in 2008. CRTC data confirm that profits of the private over-the-air television have been falling steadily to the point where by mid-2008, the entire industry delivered negligible profit. What might initially have been considered a cyclical downturn has now emerged as a major structural change threatening the viability of over-the-air television. The over-the-air broadcasters are telling the CRTC and your committee that audience is down, advertising is down, costs are up, transition to digital is not affordable, and Canadian programming obligations are unsustainable. While some have questioned the need for over-the-air television delivery in future, Parliament and the CRTC have a responsibility to consider the needs of 3 million Canadians who rely on over-the-air reception. In a report commissioned by the Department of Canadian Heritage, Canadian Media Research, Inc. concludes that, and I'm quoting, "Given the slowing trend in the past 4 to 5 years, it seems unlikely that the over-the-air segment will decline by much in the coming years." Unquote. In other words, over-the-air viewing by millions of Canadians will continue to be a feature of our audiovisual system well into the future. Cities with over-the-air viewing exceeding the Canadian average include Windsor at 27%, Saskatoon 15%, Montreal 14%, Quebec and Sherbrooke 13%. Even in cities with a lower proportion of over-the-air viewing, the number of viewers is substantial. For example, Toronto, 477,000, Vancouver, 138,000, Edmonton, 113, Ottawa, 111,000. CMRI also reports that even in households subscribing to a cable or satellite service, not all television sets are hooked up to the cable satellite service. Over-the-air viewing accounted for 25% of TVO's audience in 2006, 16% for CBC English television, 14% for CTV, and 8% for Global. With the advent of digital over-the-air conversion in 2011, many of these Canadians will have an incentive to become cable or satellite customers, although the CMR study indicates that 26% of over-the-air viewers cannot afford the cable and satellite charges. Digital conversion may be expected to increase the profitability of the distributors at a time when over-the-air television providers are in crisis. As you know, in the United States of America, the federal government provided a coupon program to subsidize the purchase of digital converters. Why has no similar program been announced in Canada? And what about financial assistance to over-the-air broadcasters to help with the one-time cost of digital conversion? Even a small portion of the revenue from reselling the vacated analog frequencies would easily pay for this. Public policy should recognize the vital contribution that Canadian over-the-air stations make to the cultural fabric of Canada and create conditions for sustainable, therefore profitable, over-the-air services. This can only be done by ensuring that over-the-air television has the financial capacity to produce local Canadian programming. Canadians rely on their local television stations for news about their communities, the kind of local coverage that specialty channels cannot provide. In April of 2008, Friends and several partners commissioned and submitted to the CRTC a Polara study on Canadians' views on deregulating cable and other TV distributors, which reported the results of a survey of 1,200 cable and satellite subscribers. Page 32 demonstrates that the Canadians consider local news their top television priority. There's a graphic, Mr. Chair, which makes that clear. At a policy hearing last year, the CRTC heard evidence from Nanos research that 78% of respondents indicated that having local news was of high or very high value to them. And the CMRI 2008 TV Trends and Quality Survey, a report on Canadians' attitudes towards TV, to which Friends subscribes, offers corroborating data. I won't go through it, it's there. Local news, amongst Anglophone viewers at least, is by far the most important service available on television. And as you know, local programming is most threatened in smaller and medium-sized communities where there is often only one local source. Maintaining local programming on over-the-air television requires a change in the economic model. The CRTC's Local Programming Improvement Fund, though a laudable initiative, is far too small to address this challenge. Polara found that a majority of cable and satellite subscribers would be willing to pay $3 more per month to protect and enhance Canadian programming. You can see the data in the graphic. Friends believes that over-the-air television should be resourced on a level playing field with the specialty channels. Over-the-air television networks should have access to the second revenue stream, a fee for carriage, provided they promise to use at least a portion of the money to maintain and enhance local programming. We propose that the networks commit to a three-way split among local or drama programming, 1/3, digital conversion costs, and the bottom line until 2011, and thereafter the split should be 2/3 to drama or local programming and 1/3 to their bottom line. Cable monopolies should not be permitted to generate very substantial profits from the sale of their cable profits, driven by the over-the-air stations, without being obliged to pay for the services that they then resell. Friends recommends that cable monopolies should be permitted to pass along this charge to their subscribers only if their profit before interest and tax were to descend below 15%. We also propose that the CBC should abandon ads on TV except during professional sports coverage. Reducing the supply of advertising avails would assist the private television business. In return for vacating ads on non-sports programs, CBC television should be refinanced either by a levy on cable or satellite distributors, to be determined by the CRTC, or through general government revenues, or by some combination of the two. This would transform CBC television into a genuine public broadcaster. This new approach could be phased in over several years, and there is substantial evidence that Canadians would approve of this reform. A number of current members of this committee participated actively in a year-long review of the future role of the national public broadcaster during the last Parliament. You, Mr. Chair, were the chair of that committee. Last year, your committee recommended in Defining Distinctiveness in a Changing Media Landscape report that per capita annual funding for public broadcasting should be increased from $33 to $40, which, by the way, would bring Canada to half the average in Western democracies. Last month, in a poll of 3,361 Canadians, which Friends commissioned, Polara found that 54% of Canadians support your recommendation, 26% reject it as too high, and 20% consider it to be too low. In other words, 3/4 of Canadians believe annual support to the CBC should rise to at least $40 per Canadian per year. We also want to share with you a second finding from the recent poll. Polara asked the following question. Assume for a moment that your federal Member of Parliament asked for your advice on an upcoming vote in the House of Commons on what to do about CBC funding. Which of the following three options would you advise him or her to vote for? And one was increasing funding to the CBC from current levels. A second was maintaining funding for the CBC at current levels. A third was decrease funding for the CBC from current levels. And as you'll see in the graphic, 47% of Canadians would advise members of Parliament to increase it. 31 would keep it the same, 9 would decrease it, and 13% have no view. Now, Mr. Chair, I just want to conclude by saying that you can imagine our concern when we recently learned that Minister Moore's April 29th assurance the CBC cuts does not square with the facts. That concerned us greatly. And je vais conclure par dire merci.
And I will conclude by saying thank you for your attention and my best wishes in your important deliberations. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Morrison, you have an in-depth understanding of CBC Radio Canada. You also know its budgeting. You're aware of the latest budget. I'm trying to clarify something. The government said that it has increased the CBC Radio Canada's budget. However, when we look at the budget, and I asked the minister this, in the latest budget we see a $62.8 million budget cut. So how can you reconcile those two positions?
That I better understand. I think what I was sitting across the hall when you had a communication with Minister Moore just 2 weeks ago, and in it you, as I recall, held up the main estimates, which showed a 5.6% cut to the budget of the CBC. Minister Moore consulted his deputy and acknowledged that that was in fact what was in the main estimates, but indicated to you that the government was going to supplement that with $60 million. I believe that has not yet happened, but I presume that we could take him at his word. But on Friday, CBC has many qualities. One of them is that its employees leak like sieves, Mr. Rodriguez. And
I'll get that to that later.
Okay.
That's my next question. I just want to finish this.
Okay.
One.
So altogether,
but I just want to make sure. So if CBC gets this 60 million, so there's no cut of 60 million, but it's even. There's no increase at all, right? So at best case scenario, it's even. Worst case scenario, they lose $60 million.
Well, if you take purchasing power into account, which is something that is done over time to factor inflation in order to find out what a dollar will buy, you will find that CBC has been getting less federal purchasing power from its grant over the years pretty well consistently. We've done an analysis over the last 20 years, and it has been continuing to go down. And I think that's the meaningful statistic, Mr. Rodriguez, that you should keep your eye on, rather than the non-inflation dollars.
Okay. Maintenant, ce qu'on lit aujourd'hui, c'est que dans
what we've read today is that in a strategic review, the government could reduce Radio Canada funding even more. We're talking about $56 additional million. So that's another 5% cut out of the $1.1 billion appropriation provided by Ottawa. Now, I've read your statement. You said that Moore misled Parliament and the public when he said there would be no new cuts. So if Mr. Lacroix is right in that there's a strategic review and that CBC Radio Canada sees an added reduction of 5% in its funding, so that's 56 million. What would be the impact on staff? Would there be another round of job cuts?
CBC's in a crisis right now. Huh? I mean, they've laid off 10% of their staff, and so it's not a very good time to ask them to amputate more. I am aware that the Federal Treasury Board has this exercise that a variety of government departments and agencies go through. I just felt, Mr. Rodriguez, that it was unfortunate that at this time when CBC is in a crisis, they would be asked to consider further cuts. And I sat in the room 2 weeks ago when you asked Minister Moore if he could guarantee that CBC would be receiving the money, and he told you that he could. And at least that's what I heard, Mr. Rodriguez, and I was very disappointed to see that this happened.
Ce qui est inquiétant, très rapidement, ce qui est inquiétant, lorsque M. Lacroix...
It's worrisome when Mr. Lacroix appeared before the committee. He said that for every dollar in lost revenue, the CBC has to cut $1 to balance its budget, which means that tomorrow morning there would be many job cuts to compensate for that cut.
Through me to Mr. Rodriguez, because the 5 minutes is up. Ms. Lavallee, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison, I have a question for you. I know you have a good understanding of CBC Radio Canada, and perhaps you could help us decode the minister's word. What the minister says and does, it does not seem to balance out. For instance, the best example is the one you gave today, when the minister, when he last appeared before our committee, said that indeed he did not intend to make additional cuts. And as part of a strategic review, is asking CBC Radio Canada to identify 5% in additional cuts, up to $56 million. You know that the Conservatives applaud in the House of Commons whenever we talk about the disappearance of CBC Radio Canada. And even here in committee, the questions by our Conservative colleagues are very harsh towards the corporation. We don't feel any empathy or any assistance. When the minister is asked about these questions, he says that he maintains the Conservative government's commitment during the last election campaign. But it seems that the second part of his sentence, but we will not ever again take such a commitment, that is to maintain the corporation's funding. So how do you decode the minister's words? Do you feel that the Conservative government wants to assist CBC Radio Canada maintain its budget?
Is nonpartisan, and sometimes that is actually difficult. And in the years that I have been doing my job, I've had reason to criticize this government and a Liberal government, and also what was then known as a progressive Conservative government. But I will be very candid with you, Madame Lavallee, and that is I detect in the current government two discordant messages. During the last election campaign, a Conservative fundraising letter came into our hands, which talked about, which asked about, do you think that the money that's being spent on CBC is being well spent or not? And it caused us to actually commission a public opinion poll from Nanos Research to find that Canadians' answer was 63% yes and 25% no. We asked the Prime Minister to give his answer to the question. He wouldn't. So Minister Moore says good things, things that I would want a heritage minister to say about public broadcasting, but there are other messages from the government, and I thought that Mr. Rodriguez's question 2 weeks ago and Minister Moore's response put that to rest. Effectively, Mr. Rodriguez used the word guarantee. Would you give the committee a guarantee? And the minister said yes. And then to read on Friday that now the CBC is once again being put through an exercise which could lead to a 5% cut 12 months from now, I thought that was most unfortunate and inconsistent with his guarantee.
Okay. Est-ce que vous trouvez que c'est cohérent avec ce qu'une personne, avec ce qu'un...
Find that is consistent, regardless of the stripes of the minister. I don't want to get you into a partisan debate, but regardless of the minister's stripes, do you find it normal that on one side he tells committee members that he doesn't intend to cut, and then he turns around and he asks the president and CEO of Radio-Canada, CBC, to find an additional 5% in cuts?
Which is something like hitting them when they're down, if you know that expression. And it would seem to be an inappropriate time if the government had any discretion to impose such an exercise on the national public broadcaster when it is in a crisis.
Quelle est votre principale recommandation pour...
What is your main recommendation to assist Radio-Canada CBC?
Actually, an idea from Prime Minister Harper when he was the leader of the opposition. He made a speech to the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, I have it here, where he said that he thought that CBC television should withdraw, and I mentioned this in my remarks, should withdraw from the advertising market except when it is broadcasting professional sports, and that would help the private sector by changing supply-demand, and in return that CBC should be provided with stable, long-term funding. The words are right in his speech, and I think that that would be a very good idea, because right now on both SRC television and CBC television on the English side, too much of their activity is chasing audiences for advertisers, and too little is doing what public broadcasters do in other Western democracies.
29th meeting, and you were there. I'm sure you remember me trying to just get a straight answer from him why he said very clearly in the media at the middle of the crisis of funding for CBC, when CBC was trying to get bridge financing, and he said there was never any discussion at all about the loan against future appropriations, which I found very odd, because it was clearly in the article, and he said, of course, I was pulling headlines out of thin air and stuff, and I went back and I checked it, and sure enough, it was a very clear and definitive statement, probably as definitive as his statement was at the meeting that he said there would be no further cuts to CBC, and now we're seeing $56 million being identified. It's very hard for us, I think, at this point to take the minister's word that he doesn't have a vendetta and his government doesn't have a vendetta against the CBC. When you were sitting there, did you hear a very clear enunciation that the attack on CBC was finished as far as he was concerned? Because it looks like it's just starting.
Mr. Chair, a very brief answer would be yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and with that, Mr. Del Mastro, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses, thank you for appearing before us today. I guess for the benefit of my colleagues here, there was a couple of good things that came out in the releases today. Of course, one is that 5% of the CBC's budget is now $56 million, which demonstrates evidence, frankly, Mr. Chair, that the total budget is over $1.1 billion, and I'm glad that that's officially out on the record. That's, of course, what we've been saying for some time. Secondly, with respect to strategic review, Mr. Chair, I just pointed out to the entire committee that strategic review is a process undertaken by all departments and all parts of the government, and it does not mean, of course, what the strategic review purpose is to indicate those processes, those operations of the department that are the 5% least efficient. It is not about cuts, and any reference to that is completely false. It's about value for taxpayers, and it's about being effective in spending taxpayers' money. Now, perhaps people on that side of the table aren't concerned with that, Mr. Chair. I can assure you people on the government side, people on this side of the table are very concerned in being effective and efficient with taxpayers' dollars. That's what strategic review is about. There is no inconsistency in what the minister said. He has promised more than $1.1 billion in funding for the CBC, and that's what they will get. Now, with that clear, Mr. Chair, Mr. Morrison, you spent the first majority of your presentation talking about over-the-air, people receiving over-the-air broadcasting, and I have some interest in that. Now, the numbers that you're given, are those just the numbers of people that aren't subscribing to cable or satellite, or is that actual confirmed numbers of people that are watching television over the air?
It is the latter, and the survey by Canadian Media Research was based on a sample of 1,500 Canadians drawn from those who did not have satellite or cable service. As you may know, Damastro, those people constitute about 9 to 10% of the population.
Right. Well, and you're right. We are aware 9% of households either don't subscribe to satellite or to cable TV. We just don't know if they're watching television or not.
Mr. Morrison, you have a broad, comprehensive view of the broadcasting industry in Canada. Were you able to notice that there are two types of problems, one in Quebec and one in the rest of Canada, and that indeed there are two types of solutions that are called for?
English and the French audiovisual systems are very, very different. As you know, the popularity of programs in the French language and particularly inside Quebec is immense. It's quite possible to get a substantial portion of the population of Quebec watching one signal at one time. That does not usually exist in English-speaking Canada, except for the most popular Hollywood programs. So the two are very different, and I think the broadcasting policy has recognized that over the years. The CRTC is exceptionally sensitive towards the need of the Francophone community, and as you know, the budgets of organizations like SRC, CBC are not chopped on a population basis, but in order to provide some equilibrium. So Canada has been a flexible country in the last 50, 60 years with respect to the differing needs of the two systems. The group I represent is preoccupied with the English language side, which is, of course, continually washed with satellite rain from the United States of America.
Okay, thank you.
Merci.
Next question, Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to welcome you all here, as I did at the very beginning, but I have to say that this meeting has taken a turn for the worse. I feel incumbent to correct some things that have been stated here today, because they tear at my core. There has never been a situation in the House of Commons since I have arrived where any person in any party has ever clapped at the thought that CBC might fail. So I want that to be put on the record to show that that has never happened.
Point of order, that's not correct, so I think she should strike it. We could go all the way up to the minister as to who was heckling about CBC. We've all witnessed it. So I just think, just stick to your questioning.
Just stick
to your questioning.
No one has ever done that.
We're not getting in it.
It's ridiculous.
I want a little peace. I allowed this side of the House, this side of the witnesses, to say pretty well what they wanted to say about the government, and I am going to allow this side of the table to make a response. And if that's not the case, I won't allow anyone to say anything against the government.
If you would like to take a look at these Polara public opinion polls, or learn more about these issues and find out how you can get involved, please visit our website at www.friends.ca. Thanks for watching, and all the best.